So, tell me, Al-Radi, what are you gonna do with this fucking book? What, is he deaf?
I'm going to make an ice blue, terrifying film about people you love.
That is brilliant!
Brilliant indeed. My name is Jim Scampoli. I've seen every episode of The Sopranos and 3 episodes of The Offer.
My name's Jacob Burrows, and I've seen every episode of The Sopranos and 1 episode of The Offer. Welcome to Cut to Black. We're talking about Paramount Plus exclusive #Paramount show from Paramount, The Offer. It's about the Godfather, everybody, and it's got some tangential connections to what we usually talk about on this feed, but mostly it's just mob stuff. So yeah, why would we not talk about it when it's got mob stuff, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, especially with The Sopranos, you know, the Godfather is obviously something they talk about quite a bit. And also on this show, we did discuss Godfather 1 and 2, as well as Coda, the death of Michael Corleone. I think that's just the name, right? It doesn't even have Godfather 3. It's just Coda. Oh, no, I know it's actually Mario Puzo's Coda, the death of Michael Corleone, I believe.
I don't know. I watched it back when it was called The Godfather 3, okay? Back when it was shit. And you watched it when it was still shit, but they had some extra scenes. So, you know.
I still have not even seen the Godfather 3 proper, I assume. But anyways, we're talking about The Offer. We're only going to talk about the first episode, even though I have seen 3 of them. This show just kind of like showed up. I remember when we were discussing The Godfather, we did mention because at first we're like, oh, they're making a TV version of The Godfather. Just assume they were like readapting it or something, which would be insane. And then we found out, no, it's actually more about the making of it. And we're like, oh, okay, maybe. And then all of a sudden it just happened. I mean, I don't know if it's because a lot of people don't really have Paramount Plus. Maybe it's due to the quality of the show. But it doesn't feel like, at least in whatever my algorithmic bubble that I'm in, it hasn't really penetrated too much. But we did want to check in and at least discuss the first episode. Maybe we'll circle back and see how it finishes out on the season. But I guess first things first, this show is, I don't know if he directs all the episodes, but one of the main director and I think developer is Dexter Fletcher, who we just realized before we started recording is Soap from Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Not sure if anyone's seen that out there. It's a great movie.
They have. They're Sopranos fans. They will have watched Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
He also did direct Rocket Man, the recent Elton John film, and he did have to step in for disgraced director Bryan Singer to finish up Bohemian Rhapsody. So not too bad. I mean, I guess a decent record. I did see Eddie the Eagle. I remember that movie as well. Barely.
I liked Rocket Man quite a bit, actually. Yeah, and
which I didn't see. But
yeah, and no, I was just gonna say it's like a few things that are kind of in the kind of biopic, like a film about people who are kind of still alive, but we're finding the story in it, like that kind of thing for several of those, right? Kind of a theme. And not that I think we need to justify the connection even further, but I mean, Godfather, the Godfather's influence, the film mostly, but I suppose the book, as we learn about, it's been so massive on the whole genre, right? Like, not only we've talked about stuff like we've talked about how actual mobsters like would have changed their behavior and the way they talked after The Godfather came out because it was such a hit. We've also talked about in the most recent episode about how The Sopranos, it came from the fact that David Chase, it was suggested to him to make a Godfather TV show, right? So like that, and obviously the characters in the show, they keep quoting it, but also like without The Godfather, you don't have Goodfellas. You don't have the actors who are in Goodfellas who are also in The Sopranos. There's a whole, it's such a significant chunk of the ecosystem, the media ecosystem related to the mafia, of which The Sopranos is sort of a crown jewel, right? So this show, it's got 10 episodes, right? In total. It's not quite finished at the time we're recording this. But yeah, 10 episodes. It kind of breaks down the making of The Godfather. And yeah, it's exactly what it says on the tin. That's what they do. That's my takeaway from episode 1. Yep, they are telling us how that happened.
Yeah. And the writer / creator is Michael Token, who also wrote. He's credited as the writer on Escape at Dannemora, which is a recent TV miniseries. Well, I guess from 2018, so it's fairly recent. That Ben Stiller directed, which I liked a lot. And I mean, I guess he also was nominated, or did he win the Oscar for The Player back in the early 90s? Nominated. He also, for any of my other old folks out there, if you remember Gleaming the Cube, classic skateboarding film that was always on cable back in the 80s, he wrote that. And now he's written The Offer. And you know what you said? Like you were just saying, if we didn't have Godfather, we wouldn't have Goodfellas, wouldn't have Sopranos. And you know what? We wouldn't have The Offer either. So let's show our gratitude.
Wow. Yeah, you're right.
So we'll get it. Yeah, we'll just talk about the pilot. And I guess the thing is, first off, it's in the same vein as a lot of these these shows / miniseries that keep coming out, kind of like the Ryan Murphification of television, like American Crime Story or Feud, or what was another one they did? Well, they did like I think American Crime Story did like OJ, and it also did like the Bill Clinton scandal. Like you take these.
Sorry, I have no idea. Ryan Murphy made Glee. I just had to Google him.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
He made Glee, and I think he made like way back in the day Nip Tuck, I think. But his thing now is, he puts out. Well, he also did American Horror Story, but they do these like bio type shows, but they're like sensationalized. And even to a lesser extent, there's a lot of these movies coming out. Like Netflix is putting out. There's that movie that's about like the medical controversy that happened. It's hard to keep up with all these. It's like these things start out as like either a popular podcasts or like a Netflix documentary series, and now they're just redoing it as a show. And it's like so
Tiger
weird.
King.
Yes, like Tiger King, or even, which I never saw, The Staircase, but I know that's one on HBO right now. Like The Staircase was a documentary, and now it's an HBO show. It's just bizarre that someone would watch a documentary and then they're like, I want to see actors do that now. But anyways, that's where we're at. Or even there was a recent one that with Jared Leto for Apple TV that's based off like the WeWork business here. I don't know. This is a thing that keeps happening. Anyways, The Offer is one of them. And
so you're saying there's a sensationalization of like it doesn't feel quite realistic when you're watching it. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, but it's also, I get a weird feeling about these, even though I haven't watched a lot of them. But like the weird thing that happens is that people watch, like say you watch Ryan Murphy's show on the OJ trial, but then that becomes, the conversation now becomes, this is exactly how it happened. Even though it's clearly a TV show and liberties have to be taken to either like make it episodic, to make it a little bit more interesting and dramatic. But now it's like people are telling the stories of a real life thing, but through the prism of a television show.
Preach, Jim, preach. Tell the good people. I obviously have a stake in this game. I have a little podcast on this here network called Real History. Where we talk about historical movies and television shows, and we basically break down how much did they sacrifice of the truth to tell a good story. Like, it's always an interesting balance. Like, you should change things. Like, reality is not a story. You need to tell stories. You need to change things. But the thing we often come back to in those discussions is that if someone's overtly doing something, they're kind of signaling that something's not real, then, you know, like A Knight's Tale, we get it. Like, it's not realistic, but it's so clear in that it's not realistic that you don't question it. Whereas if something's more trying to pass itself off as like, this is how it happened, then even a smaller mistake or thing that's wrong historically makes it seem like, I don't really trust them anymore. And watching a show like this, I do kind of feel that because I'm like, I don't know. I googled some things and I'm like, okay, I guess this kind of happened. Yeah, sure. But I was already kind of like, it doesn't feel realistic. Maybe just because the characters don't feel super three-dimensional anyway. Not to start us out on a negative note.
Well, and also, I mean, full disclosure, I only started. It's like it's just a sign that I'm old because I only started thinking this way when things I lived through all of a sudden became movies.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was plenty of this stuff when I was younger, and it was just something I wasn't alive for. So I'm like, yeah, this is exactly how it happened, just like the movie said. But now it's like things I was alive for. So I'm like, wait a minute, that's a little different. But yeah, so getting into this, and again, I mean, it's probably going to skew a little negative here. So I will say that from watching 3 episodes, I feel like the show gets a bit better. But I feel like this is a rough pilot. I mean, even from the jump, dude, like the beginning, we have kind of like a San Gennaro type festival going on, and we're seeing like these, classic mobster guys. And they even have like a kind of dumb Godfather joke, like right at the beginning when he picks up the cannoli and the guy's like, "Hey, leave the cannoli." And and I mean, I guess this guy that Giovanni Ribisi's playing is a real person. Is it like Joe Colombo? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like Giovanni Ribisi, but I don't know what he's doing here. I don't know these choices he's making. It's just so weird to think of like The Sopranos. The Sopranos makes it seem so effortless to have just some, connected, made guys, whatever it might be, hanging out and just feeling real. And maybe it's because this is a different time frame. It's supposed to, I guess if the book hasn't been written yet, it's like the late 60s or something. So things are a little bit different, but it just kind of comes off of like, yeah, I'm a mobster, and these guys are mobsters. I'm gonna gut his fucking son in front of him and kill his whole family if he doesn't pay me what he owes. It's just a little like, I don't know. I don't know why. It's a weird way to start the show. I mean, I like the idea, and I don't even know if this is what they're doing, but I like the idea of coming at it from almost like, hey, the Hollywood's its own mob, and then we're dealing with the real mob here. And I don't know if they're really doing that, but I feel like maybe there'd be something to mine with that.
That sounds like a good theme. Maybe they should have done that.
Yeah, I get they're trying to bring us into like the mafia, but I don't know. I feel like you probably would have been better off just starting us with Ruddy, who's our main character. And even in this, it's like hard to even gauge that he's the main character for a while.
Yeah. And Giovanni Ribisi, I didn't like, he looks very different than he usually does, right? Like I guess physically he does a good job of transforming into this character, but it's a little bit of a caricature. And yeah, you're right. It's an interesting choice. Honestly, when I started watching it, I think I actually Googled like to make sure, like, wait, isn't this about the making of The Godfather? Not because it is a scene out of The Godfather, and I get that that's based on reality, so they're showing that reality. But I was genuinely like, is this like, what are we seeing here? Are we seeing? Because I vaguely recall that the whole having a gun in the bathroom thing was in reference to a real event. I'm like, are we seeing that? What is happening? Because it's a very kind of, it's a weird thing that a show about the making of The Godfather starts with what feels like a scene out of The Godfather without any kind of separation from it, or like indicating how this is different, if that makes sense.
Well, and also it doesn't make any sense because like even if that's based off a real story, it was a whole different like timeline. It was like, history. It was, when it was kind of stories from when Puzo was growing up. I mean, maybe he worked in some more recent things, I guess. But it's what they're doing. It reminds me of what the Fargo show did, but the Fargo show did it in a great way. Is like the Fargo show would have little nods to the movie or almost like little recreations of the scenes as like little kind of homages without being like, this is it. And you're right. Like, I think the biggest mistake, and I didn't even think of it until the way you're describing it, is that we don't know how to read this. Are we supposed to read this as this is the actual moment that inspired the part of the Godfather story, or is just them being like, hey, we know we're doing a Godfather show, so it's like we're playing with the idea, because it's a scene later when Ribisi's in the bathroom, and of course it's got the old style like flush on the toilet, and he looks like he's kind of ready to do something. You're like, oh my god, this is like Michael. But then they flip it. I don't necessarily have a problem with what they're doing there, but yeah, it's so early that I would imagine any viewer were like, okay, so is this is what inspired The Godfather? But I don't even think they're trying to say that. They're just trying to say like, here's a little nod, like these are our little homages we're putting in the piece to The Godfather.
Yeah, you're right, and you're right about the timeline as well. In that The Godfather takes place very shortly after World War II. It was published in 1969. I was reading a little bit beforehand of how it took I think 5 years to write it. And we're seeing Mario Puzo in this from way before he even had the idea of it. So I guess we're kind of in the mid 60s there at the start. There's probably a year somewhere that could make it more clear. But it's 15, 20 years after the events of The Godfather. But I suppose this festival is still happening. Like, I'm not poking holes in it logically. I'm just kind of, it's more just thematically of like, what are we doing here, guys? Trying to figure that out. But yeah, as you said, we get introduced to a few different characters here over the course of the first few scenes. And you're right, it's not necessarily clear who the main one is. So after we see the mob, we're introduced to Bob Evans, who's the head of Paramount, who's kind of swaggering in. He's talking to everyone. He's wheeling and dealing and making sure everyone's making their movies, right? And, this is a setting that I would be... like as somebody who studied film, obviously you have a podcast talking about film and TV. Like, I'm into this sort of thing, so it should be an easy win for me. And actually, now that you said it, I'm just like, why didn't they make it more of a theme of how the mob and the mob is the same as the media thing? They never did that, not in the pilot anyway. But yeah, he's the head of Paramount. He seems like kind of a scumbag, but kind of a wheeler and dealer. He's not our main character, but he's introduced second.
And I know Bob Evans is pretty famous. Like, the impression, I mean, I don't mean to like slag off his acting. He's doing a good job, but like, it is kind of like a pretty dead on. And again, I don't even know enough about Bob Evans, but I just know, like, when I was like much younger, I remember there was like a Mr. Show sketch that I didn't get. And I found out it was because it was like a take on Bob Evans, and he had put out a book. Like, he's a famous like wheeler and dealer, producer, womanizer, Hollywood classic guy. So, that's why they're kind of highlighting him a bit here. But what's interesting though too is like, and maybe it's because this is just the truth, but he's the head of the studio, but they also want to make him cool. Like, usually the head of the studio is the one that's like, Francis Ford Coppola doesn't get that picture. Or, we got to cut out the blah, blah, blah. But they make him, like, even in these early scenes, he's fighting for the art. Like, he's talking about The Odd Couple. He's like, we're gonna spend this money. We're going to make that movie. Or we're going to fight for the death of, I don't even know what movie they're talking about at that point. Like, they're trying to, someone's saying that the character should live. I'm sure if I knew more movies from the 60s, I'd get it. But then they have to have, like, the owner and, like, his lawyer or whoever the other guy is be more of the system, which I mean, I guess it's probably just how it was, but it's just, I don't know, it came off a little weird because, again, I'm thinking like, is this the main character? But it's like, no, Ruddy's the main character.
You know what a pet peeve of mine is in anything historical where someone is just right about the future. Like in this, when he's just like, mark my words, the Odd Couple's gonna save this whole company. And I'm like, that's just a small example, but it always, for whatever reason, annoys me when someone makes a historical thing, whether it's like set in the 80s and they're like, one day we're all gonna work from our computers, man, we're all gonna be plugged up, and they're like, you've been smoking too much hash, son. And it always bugs me because it's always us making it, patting ourselves on the back kind of in the present tense. I don't really know how to explain it, but I'm always just like, ugh. And then especially when it's like people who I don't know, all the characters are so cool because everyone knows like the right thing to do and everything to say. We'll get more into that on our main character, but yeah, just a small pet peeve of mine. But just like you said, Robert or Bob Evans is kind of the head of Paramount in that I guess he's running it, but then we have like the business people, the owners, etc. So if I can draw an analogy to a buddy cop movie, it's essentially that he's not the commissioner. You know, he's not even like the head of the station. It feels like, because he's the one who is, as you said, is fighting for the art, kind of, but also is just a wheeler and dealer. So yeah, he's just a great guy. Loads of great guys in the show.
And I mean, I'm not trying to be too like negative, because it's like they do have kind of a lot to do in this pilot, but that's why I almost feel like, and maybe this is a studio thing, or maybe this is a audience retention thing. That's why I feel like the mafia stuff shouldn't have come in. Like maybe it could come in the back half or towards the end of this episode, because it's like, yeah, we got to introduce Paramount. We got to get Bob Evans. We got to meet like the new head of the studio, who clearly like just kind of bought it, like as a rich guy, doesn't necessarily know like the artistic side of it. Then we have Ruddy and like how his path brings him to that. Then of course we have Mario Puzo and like where his path is. So they do have a lot to do, but that's why it's almost, and again, maybe this is like hearsay if I was in the room, like suggesting like, hey, we start small and, you know, we have a story about Ruddy and like how he slowly starts leveling up and then we start getting into the bigger world. But I'm sure there's an argument of like, hey, in this day and age of streaming, we need to fucking hook them real quick. So we need to start with Mafia and gut the kid and kill the family, or else they're going to flick on over to Netflix or something, you know?
Yeah, and to be clear, no one's gutted or killed, but you know, they introduced those like themes early on. I think you've really hit the nail on the head with the pacing of the episode is kind of weird. I remember watching it and I was like, there's 9 more episodes of this, because like we see so much happening in this one that I'm like, it's an hour long. If there was, I swear, with 1 more hour, you could close out this story, because they pack in so much stuff in this one. It would have made a lot of sense to me if the Mafia theme was introduced at the start of episode 2, maybe, like, and then there are people who are upset about it. But you know, they do have a lot to try to get in here in a short amount of time, and I think you're right as well. Like, I think there's definitely an argument to say like we got to get this ball rolling here. We got to get to the good stuff, you know. But it does mean that characters, when they're introduced, they feel like they don't really struggle with anything. Like especially Ruddy, who we will get into right now, because Ruddy is this guy who works in programming at Rand Computers, wears a white shirt and a tie. All we really see him do is kind of reading him. This scene tells you everything about this character. He's reading a magazine at his desk, and his boss comes up and is like, yeah, I'm not paying you to read. Give me those reports should be on my desk by the end of the day or whatever. And he's like, they were there this morning. And and then he's like, oh, good. And then the other guy, after he leaves, is like, stop making us look bad. And he's like, you're doing a fine job of that on your own. And
what's hilarious? Yeah, this is Ruddy. And what's hilarious is because it's like, we're trying to gauge who is this guy? What does he do? He's sitting at a desk that has like a protractor on it and like pencils and shit. And they're just talking vaguely about contracts. And what's hilarious, because then in like the next scene, he like meets his neighbor, who, like, thank God he had this neighbor, because it brought him right into the business. But he meets his neighbor, and his a little storytelling trick. The neighbor's even like, what is it you do again? And it's like a perfect excuse for him to try to explain. But what's so funny is he goes, hey, I've already explained it 13 times. You think if I explain it again, it's going to matter? And he's like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so they don't really get into it.
It just made me laugh, because then it even comes up again, I think, a little later in the episode. Because, someone's like, oh, someone else is like, what do you do at a party? And he's like, programming. And they're like, they make the joke of like, oh, what network? And he's like, nah, I work at Rand. And that, I mean, I guess we get a little bit there. It's like computer programming, but it's like military.
But it doesn't even matter, because he's finished with that job 2 minutes into us knowing this character. So Ruddy's the data guy or whatever. He turns TV writer. He's way too cool. He's way too good at everything and way too cool. And the fact that the real Ruddy is a producer on the show kind of puts me off a bit. Or actually, I don't know if he's a producer technically, but he's got his fingers in the pot. And
Yeah, he might even be active. Like, he definitely has like an executive producer. I don't know if that just means because it's based off his book or something, but I'm sure he also has a little bit of a say in what's going on here.
Yeah, and I want to tell a short story about when I was in film school. I did a class on documentary filmmaking, and basically we didn't have many great ideas. We ended up throwing something together where we interviewed 4 different people about different creative pursuits or whatever, and made a kind of argument. It's really embarrassing. One of the worst things I put together, I'd say. But one of the people being interviewed was me, and because we didn't find enough people, kind of. So, like, me being interviewed in a talking head was part of the thing. And it was a real learning experience because, as the teacher pointed out at the end, like, viewers are smart. Like, you are one of the directors or producers on this, and you are also a person being interviewed, and it's your opinions are kind of being presented in this, but we understand that the person making it is kind of presenting themselves in the story. Like, I wasn't doing a documentary where I'm like, hi, I'm making this documentary, I'm gonna go talk to people. I was like a talking head in it, and that's obfuscation, and it's kind of like people, it's off-putting to people. And in a similar sort of way, it's just, I have no problem with, people making films or TV shows about their lives. It's just that he didn't have to be that cool. He feels like a fan fiction self-insert, like a Marty Stew, and he's dead right about everything on what I mentioned before. Because he goes to this party, meets some writers, meets a hot woman who is immediately his girlfriend. He immediately sleeps with her, and he just understands television and how to write it better than all of these TV writers, which is cool. Like, having a talented fish out of water person come in, like, and that's a good thing. But it's also like, he wants to pitch the military comedy, and his co-writer that he meets, he wants to do something else, but it was the military like, that was the right thing to do. And he has no negative qualities. So yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of a lot.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, we recently revisited the Sopranos pilot, and it's like, it's unfair to compare like any pilot to the Sopranos pilot because it's like so good. But like, you think of that and how it starts. The Sopranos pilot doesn't start with, Tony at the dumpster being like, yeah, this is trash, but we are also mafia guys, and we're gonna kill people. You know what I mean? Like, it like slowly brings you into the story about a guy, and then you slowly like learn more about him. And like, bringing it back here, like, when Ruddy pitches in the room, that kind of would have been a perfect, like, if we saw him more as like kind of a nerd, and he gets like maybe dragged by his neighbor. And again, maybe this is not how it happened, but whatever. He gets dragged by his neighbor out to a party. He starts like talking a little shop with some writers. Maybe they're goofing on him a little bit, but he has a programming mind, whatever. He does see like he mentions that comedy shows have a formula.
Dude, and then, we're like workshopping this right now, because that would make so much more sense. Because you're right, he's there in the room, right? He's saying that like television's kind of like, it's got a code, or like it's like a formula. There's a formula to it, and he talks about how different sitcoms are really the same, but in different situations, different environments. And all the TV writers are like, never thought of that. Which maybe they hadn't formalized it at this point, but you're right. That would be interesting if he's a bit more of a nerd or whatever, and he doesn't fit in, but he's saying these things, and they're like, what are you talking about? And then maybe one of them agrees, they write something together, and then in the room he taps into something more extroverted, and like, because he does a big thing at the pitch, he gets on the table, showboats and everything. And that's not impressive, because he's from the very first scene, just like we said, he's already like making everyone look bad in computers, then he's making everybody look bad in TV, he's immediately getting laid, etc. Like, so that would have been good. No,
I agree. Like, that could have been the moment where we're like, okay, we like, because we're supposed to see something special in him there. And like, I feel like obviously, like in any movie or show, like having a pitch scene is probably like hard to do, but like it's supposed to be this moment where we're like, fuck yeah, Ruddy. But you're right, like Ruddy's already fuck yeah Ruddy from shot one. So it doesn't matter. It's just another thing for him to also just immediately think sucks anyways, as we learn later in the episode. But real quick note, the show he pitches, the show Hogan's Heroes, this really has nothing to do with anything, but the main actor, Bob Crane, on that show, there's a cool movie about him called Autofocus. I guess this is kind of in the vein because it's like a real taking a real thing that happened and make a movie about it. But Bob Crane apparently secretly was like a sex addict that used to film like back in this in the 60s, and he would spend all his money on like home video equipment when no one did that, and he would film sex all the time. And then they found him bludgeoned to death with one of his cameras, and they still have never found out who killed him.
Oh, okay.
So, interesting little factoid.
What's it called? Autofocus? That's
Autofocus is the movie. It's got Greg Kinnear playing Bob Crane and Willem Dafoe as like his friend. Because I think the movie, there is his friend John Henry Carpenter, I think, is like thought to have done it, but they couldn't make it stick. But so the movie kind of explores that. Anyways,
wow,
just a
interesting
side quest.
But yeah, the show they make is Hogan's Heroes, which is too old for me to have grown up with, though I feel like I've seen it more like in as a reference in Simpsons episodes, that sort of thing. I did watch Blackadder, which is not exactly the same, but yeah. So Hogan's Heroes, it's about a military camp, but they make it a comedy. And I was at the start of this, I was just like, are they making MASH? What is happening? Because when they keep talking about military comedies, I'm like, clearly they're going to make MASH. And then they're like, it's called Hogan's Heroes. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess MASH was later or earlier or whatever.
I had the same exact thought. I was like, oh my God, this guy created MASH?
Yeah, but I think you made a good point as well about like, he gets his dream kind of in that he gets to make TV, but we don't ever see them make Hogan's Heroes. He's almost like there's a scene slightly, we're kind of sticking with his storyline now because there's other stuff happening in between, but he's like watching Planet of the Apes at the end, and he's all like enamored with it and says like, this is what it's all about, you know, making this actual movies, having everyone experience it at the same time. That's cool, but then he's like, 5 years of Hogan's, I'm gonna shoot myself in the face, and I don't even know if he means I've been doing it for 5 years or I will want to shoot myself after 5 years, because Mario Puzo is writing The Godfather at the same time. We'll get into that, and that took 5 years. So I guess he's been making the show and he hates it, but like we just saw him pitch and sell it, and now he's like, fuck this TV business. I want to be in movies immediately.
Yeah, you're right. I couldn't glean because she says like 5 years of Hogan's Heroes and you can do whatever you want, or you can make all the money in the world or something like that. And yeah, I can't tell if she means like you've been doing it for 5 years or like, hey, 5 more years. But then he has to be like, TV sucks. Like it's just like working at Rand. I fucking hate it. It's a nightmare. Which is kind of also hilarious because we're watching a TV show and we have our main character being like, TV's the fucking worst. And I mean, I know that maybe that's a little joke and things are different now, but it's just funny. And then it's even funny when he's like, you know, only time I ever saw my mom cry was at the movies.
Yeah. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough, like the previous scene is the pitch scene in his storyline. Yes. And then he's in the movie theater saying he doesn't want to make the TV show. We don't get a moment in between where he's bored out of his skull writing the same sloppy comedy like over and over, like this something about recycling the same punchlines, because it is one of those shows that would have, you know, taglines that some characters say over and over, and like, you know, there's ways he could become frustrated with it, but I'm really very much like, okay, this guy never has a setback, but I'm supposed to sympathize with him because he just managed to sell his TV show on his first try, and now he doesn't want to do it. He wants to do movies instead. Of course, he also succeeds with getting into movies immediately in his very next scene. Yeah. So, you know, so yeah, it feels like, it's just like you said at the start. It feels like they're trying to propel us as quickly as possible into the making of The Godfather, and fuck it if that means we don't get to explore what these characters are up to in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, it's because it's like, I guess we're just covering so much of this ground here that, yeah, we have to get into it, because, yeah, he gets on the lot, talks to Bob Evans, he smooth talks him, and, you know, Bob Evans has to correct him, like, don't say bit parts. I was with James Cagney, and, you know, but he likes this guy's gumption. It's clear he kind of sees a little upstart go-getter. And then he also, like, immediately gets a movie going. Although at least it fails. We don't really like hang on it too long, but at least there's like a failure there. Like he gets this movie made.
Yeah. Sorry,
And no one comes to see it. Like, I guess because he gets it made under budget. And even that, it's like, I guess we are zipping through time. So maybe he did work on the show for 5 years because he's talking to Robert Redford about maybe doing this movie. And then it's like, we're at the premiere and, no one showed up. And like his girlfriend's trying to blame the marketing. He's like, it's not the marketing. He understands it's the picture. And he's got to find his next win or else he could lose this movie producing dream that he just came up with once he lucked into TV.
Yeah, we get to see, as he's trying to talk to Robert Redford, etc., we see some of the making of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is one of my, it's a favorite movie of mine. So that's kind of fun. I'm kind of torn on a lot of, there's a lot of references to cinema and stuff, and some of it feels like it's justified. He goes there to talk to the person, but then there's also just randomly, I don't know, things that are shoved in there a little bit.
Well, because, they almost get it with Ruddy talking about the cinema experience. Because it's we're kind of like the target audience for,
yes,
we talk about TV shows, we talk about movies sometimes, and we're interested in how these things get made and the drama behind it. And I love me a good speech where someone's going to talk about, sitting in the theater as a story's unfolding and everyone's reacting. But it just, I'm fine with most of it until he says, I really got upset when he's like, it's the only time I saw my mother cry. I was like, whatever. And then when he has his new secretary or assistant or whatever, and she's like, hallowed ground, this is where blah, blah, blah happened. This is where, and I've been on studio tours, so I agree, but it just kind of comes off more as phony. For whatever reason, it's just not hitting where it should hit for me when they're doing these, the all great cinema production speeches.
Yes. Yeah, and after he does his little failed film, he's got to find a winner. And in order for him to do that, we have to take a step back because earlier in the episode, we meet Mario Puzo. And it's kind of, I feel like you made some similar reference to how they talk, like how Tony Soprano isn't like, hey, I may be a garbage guy, but I'm also a mobster. You don't have to say everything outright. It feels like within a minute of our first scene with Mario Puzo, his wife is like, do you ever think about writing a mafia book? Yeah. Which is just a hilarious line in a show about The Godfather, where it's like, how dumb do you think we are that we need to be handheld to the conclusion that this guy is going to write a mafia book? It's not necessarily that bad in itself, but it feels like everything is a little bit on the nose. And we don't build these characters as anything more than the function they fill in the plot,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even because I rewatched some of it, and because I thought the same thing, but it's actually there's two characters. There's his agent and then his wife. But when I first watched it, I thought they were the same character. But then I realized, at first his agent is they really peaked up. Everyone was their interest peaked when you talked about the mafia part. And he's like, what am I going to write, a mafia book? And then he goes home and talks to his wife, and he's like, these people are criminals. What am I going to write about? And then she's like, what? But they're like us. They pay bills. And I'm just like, oh, is this really how this guy's life was? Is this his life? I read up a bit on him. And the stuff where he owed money is true. He was in the hole with debt. He was getting advances on his previous books. He got $3,200 for that book that was kind of about his mother that they reference that he was at the reading for. And then to him, he didn't want, it is true that he didn't want to write about the mafia. He considered it as selling out because he thought of himself as more of a literary person. And for whatever reason, he just looked down upon it. But it still took him years to write. So he, obviously was the right choice. And so there's some stuff there. It's just it's this clunky delivery and how they do it because again, they're trying to do all this stuff at the same time, whereas it probably should have been broken up or spaced out a little bit more.
Yeah, because you say it took years to write, but I feel like 15 minutes in, he's got it written. Like half an hour in, we've gone from the book signing when there's absolutely no one to enormous queues because there's all this buzz about this book, even though I guess it hasn't come out yet at this point. And we check in with the mob, so we know that they're upset about this book coming out. Sinatra's upset because there's a character that's kind of him-ish in it. And yeah, so stuff progresses from there.
Yeah, stuff starts to heat up. So yeah, we got the book. And then it was a thing where I was reading about how Paramount was able to just kind of buy the rights early. And then it was like $10,000 or something. And then I think there was a promise if the movie got made, he'd get $50K. And people in Puzo's life are like, that's low. Don't take that. And he was like, I'm broke. I'll take it. And I mean, as far as the book goes, I was reading a little bit about that at the time once it sold to as like a publisher for paperback. It was the highest sale ever. Like it was $410,000. And Puzo was the type of guy where he got advances. Like he got an advance and then he took his family to Europe on a trip. And he didn't tell his wife that when they got home, they're going to have to sell their house. But it like in a classic fashion, it was dumb luck. Like he got home and he's thinking he has to sell his house. And his agent's like, yeah, we just sold the paperback rights for $410,000. And he's like, give me $100,000. And then 3 months later, he's like, give me another $100,000. So and they talk about how he didn't know how to like have money. He'd go to the library and they didn't have a book he wanted. Then he'd remember like, oh, I can go buy the book. So it's kind of like interesting dude. But yeah, we don't see any of that in the show. We know that he has diabetes and his wife's like, oh, Mario, you must eat better. You have to eat you have to eat salad, not like a nice pasta dish like our good friend Ruddy.
Yep, because Ruddy goes to visit. He's interested in doing the thing. Yeah, as you said, Paramount picks up the rights for it relatively cheap. In this episode, another company, I forget which one, is trying to buy the rights.
Yeah, Warner Brothers. I do like this part. I like this idea that it's a pissing contest, and it's like, we don't really want it, but okay, we want this now because you want it. Like they pitch that owner guy is like, I'm better than Warner Brothers. And it's like, oh, we only want to do something because you want to do something with it. And if it's worth $1 million to you, then, I like all that idea, like the way that plays out.
It's the first time in the episode that it feels like there are any stakes because they've now turned down an offer of sure money. So on a bet that they're going to be able to make even more money off this. And they've already emphasized the studio finances aren't amazing. So then it ends up with Ruddy because no one else wants to produce it within the budget that they're offering, like a relatively low budget, I guess. So he ends up being the one to actually produce The Godfather because the goal is they still need to make it with a relatively low amount of money, even though they're expecting that it should be able to turn around and get you more than that. So but because it's such a big picture, he has to convince the money guy who I guess owns the studio and everything. We heard that clip from the beginning, which is quite a good scene. And he has to start doing the actual wheeling and dealing himself, Ruddy, and talk to Mario Puzo and become pals with him and convince him to write the screenplay, even though everyone says you don't get the writer to write the screenplay if it's an adaptation. Yeah. Even though this is another one of those he was right all along things, like everything that Ruddy says. In that, I do like that there's kind of an immediate setback, at least, in that Mario Puzo's just like, I can't do it. Why did I agree to this? Even though that's the one thing I like about him in this, that he's just like, absolutely, I'm the only one who can write the screenplay, and then like I can't do it. Like, I don't know. I just sit down. I can't do it. I should never have signed up for this. And there's and we know now there are stakes because there's this bet, essentially, that they're going to make all this money from it.
And I think that's where the kind of like, this is where stuff gets where I don't want to just outright trash it, because I feel like once things are in place, it's interesting. And I'm perked up. I'm now getting invested because, like you said, we kind of have stakes now. Like it's not this shuffling of things to put them in a spot. So it starts to like, you see like, oh, okay, now I get where they're going with this. I did want to look up real quick. So yeah, Charles Bloodorn, who's the owner of Paramount. He was a guy. He worked in 1946. He went to work with the Cotton Exchange, earning $15 a week. He's from Austria, and details of his upbringing are unknown. He wasn't let's see, a lot of things, including whether he wouldn't say if he was Jewish or if he's Hollywood, blah, 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 whatever. Anyways, he formed a company that would make him a millionaire at 30. And he acquired Michigan Bumper, a small auto parts company that grew into Gulf and Western Industries, a conglomerate that ranked 61st in the Fortune 500 in 81. And basically the holdings of his company included Paramount Pictures, Madison Square Garden, Simon & Schuster Publishing. So he was just like, yeah, dude with a lot of money that just started acquiring these things. So, I mean, the show, they're not like going step by step with him, thank God, like they are with everyone else. But I guess they do a good job of showing us that, like, yeah, he's peeking in, but he doesn't quite understand the business as much as the people we're with. And he's kind of not necessarily the enemy, but like the obstacle we'll have to run up to as we're trying to, get approval to get the Godfather made.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, as you say. Things start to feel like they have a bit of stakes, and then Mario Puzo all gets into a fight with Frank Sinatra, pretty much at a club or whatever, at a restaurant, and they're almost physically fighting, and then that's obviously a bad thing, I guess.
And
he hasn't
apparently,
written anything. Yeah,
that is a real story, apparently, and also. The line at the beginning when he's like an ice blue story about people you love, apparently that really is the pitch that he gave, because that's like an older story as well. So I mean maybe that's why things are a little bit more interesting, because things are starting to heat up, and I mean this is the reason why they made this show, because they want to get into some of this real stuff. Like Sinatra was upset about this movie, and supposedly Mario Puzo's like, it's not like, he really did stand by the idea it wasn't based on Sinatra, but then to everyone else it's like it's so clear that it is. So
and also Ruddy meets Francis Ford Coppola, and it basically has to convince him to take on the movie, and then has to convince Bob Evans that he's the right person for it, and they do a little they ambush him as well, and like he's doing some producing. At least Ruddy's doing some things at this point,
and they don't they should be mining this more, but you start to see a little bit of like his like him being new and not understanding the rules is working for him, because he's doing things like, I mean, I guess they do kind of outright say it, so it is a thing. Like, hiring the person who wrote the book, even though you're not supposed to, or the way he just like shows up to get Robert Redford. And I guess the sticking point, and maybe the show does kind of point this out, the reason why they did pick him was because that movie was well under budget. So like that's what it came down to. Like, oh, it didn't do well, but you didn't overspend, so we like that. So here, do something with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a nice scene towards the end of the episode where, like, these three characters, or three plus the three main characters of the creative field of Ruddy and Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo, they're all making dinner together and hanging out because they have this house set up for the actual like pre-production and working on it. And it's nice. They're becoming friends. They're working on something creative. Like, why wouldn't I be on board with this as a person who also likes doing those sorts of things? So definitely hints throughout the episode of an interesting story and interesting dynamics, and the setting is good. It's just it feels like it's somehow rushed, and yet we don't. I don't know. It's the pace is kind of off in this first episode, and then it ends with the mobsters, who we've seen intermittently talking about how it's a horrible thing that this book is defaming Italian Americans. This is very The Sopranos, by the way. Like,
Totally.
and I think it is accurate that it goes back this far as well, obviously, from what we're saying. But they're just like, the slanderous portrayal of Italian Americans. Like Joe Colombo forms what does he call his group? The Italian Defense something or other. Italian American Civil Rights League. So we see him proclaim that he's going to be starting that, defending the good name of Italians everywhere, even though he is an actual mobster. Like, he's literally in the first scene, it's the exact same as from the book The Godfather, but he's like lies and slander, So it ends with Ruddy and his...
Another great connection for Sopranos in that same vein is that, Sopranos had episodes where, they were obviously there's the Columbus episode upset about, the way they frame Italians, but then the Sopranos in the real world had people having that same discussion about the show and how it portrayed Italians. And even to the point where there was that like New Jersey politician that like tried to block them from shooting like, part of the Pine Barrens, and then he was arrested for racketeering or some sort of like organized crime. Like, it is great how this is like a real historical thing that is just keep repeating, the cycle repeats. Here we are, another hypocrite talking about art but also being a piece of shit in real life. Like, it's pretty great.
Yeah, that is good. And I've only seen the pilot, but I was reading on the history of it, and that's exactly what happens later on as well, in that like the unions that have mob influences, they prevent them from filming in certain locations for The Godfather. So the exact same thing. But the very last scene here of the episode, we have Ruddy and his secretary, and someone comes up and I guess shoots through the back window of their car, and then we cut to black. And I feel like the pacing issues we talked about are mostly because they wanted to get to this point by the end of the episode, to show like, and now shit's getting real. But I'm like, I like the other bits,
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is just kind of it's like the cliche. It's like the cliffhanger. Like, you gotta keep watching. You gotta click for the next one. But I mean, it's not gonna. What are they gonna get shot in the head? Already, the guy is still alive. Did he get shot in the head that night?
Yeah, they're sending a message. Maybe try to give him some kind of offer. We'll see. That maybe they can't refuse. I don't know.
Maybe they will refuse it.
They might refuse it. So that's the offer, episode 1. Like you said, maybe we'll catch up on the season, have another chat about it. But I thought this might be a good intro as well, because as you said, like often with shows we talk about, I feel like a lot of people haven't heard of it. Maybe I just don't talk to people, but it feels like a show you have to seek out. Like, this show doesn't come to you. So I thought because we have this feed, people might be interested. This should be a good intro and give you an idea of whether you want to catch up on it or not. And we might do the rest of the season. We might not. What are you gonna do? Kill us? You can't.
What are you gonna do? Shoot the back of our car out?
Yeah. But any final thoughts on the episode or this new show?
Yeah, I mean, I probably said it a few times. I'm going to reiterate again, just that I know we're pretty rough on some of the problems we had, but I think it's getting to a better place. And like I said, I watched some of the other episodes, and I feel like now that we're in it, like where they're making the movie, that's a little bit more interesting to me. So once they get the pieces on the board, things start to fall in place a lot better. So it's worth sticking with it if you kind of have a small interest in it or whatever. So I'm interested to see how it finishes out.
Cool. Well, you've convinced me to watch at least episode 2, so we can go from there. Thanks for listening, everyone. Before we go, just a reminder that you can always leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Those are very much appreciated. You can also tweet at us. That's on Twitter at showswhatyouknow, the letter U. And beyond that, yeah, just tell a friend about the show. Maybe someone who likes The Sopranos, someone who hasn't watched The Sopranos yet, but who needs a companion podcast to get all the way through. We'll get him there. And beyond that, I think there's just one more thing, Jim.
Wait, what's that?
Cut to black.